Hey all, what's up? It's Amanda and I am back with another video. So today's video is going to be my June wrap up. I have a ton of books to go over with you. It's June 30th right now, so I don't anticipate finishing any more, which is good because I have too many books to talk to you about. But anyways, without further ado, let's just get right on into the video. Alright y'all, so it is hot in my house. That's why I'm wearing a tank top. It is like too hot to be wearing anything but a tank top and shorts. So if you see me sweating, like just ignore that please. Thank you so much. We are going to first start off with my Storygraph statistics. That's what they're called. So for my statistics, I have read 20 books, which equals to about 4,843 pages, and I also read 5.92 hours. I always mention this whenever we go through my wrap-ups and we go over my statistics, that the audiobook hours that I log aren't exactly accurate because most of the books that I read physically, I read them in tandem with the audiobook. So I've definitely read more than just 5.92 hours worth of audiobooks, but this statistic that I'm sharing with you is all of the books that I read solely via audiobook. So I read 5.92 hours worth of audiobooks, like solely via audiobooks. Anyways, now for our moods. I'm just going to be sharing like the top 4 moods. So the biggest chunk of the pie chart is lighthearted, then we have emotional, funny, and dark, and those are the biggest chunks. For pacing, 10% of the books that I read were slow-paced, which equals to 2 of the books that I read. 60% of the books that I read were medium-paced, which equals to 12 books that I read. And then the rest, which is 30% of the books that I read, were fast-paced. And again, that equals 6 books that I read. For page number, I have an even split of 50% of the books that I read were less than 300 pages, so that means 10 of the books that I read. And then the other 10, or the other 50%, is between 300 and 499 pages. I read shorter books most of the time, like typically in a month I'll read more books that are less than 300 pages, but I'm trying to up my page count per book. You know what I mean? So my average page count, I'm trying to up it to like high 200s, close to 300, but we'll see what happens. For audiobook length, the 2 audiobooks that I read were both less than 8 hours long. So that's why it says 100% of the books that I read were less than 8 hours long. 100% of the books that I read were fiction. I have not been reading nonfiction lately. I feel like ever since I finished school this past semester, I'm just like turned off from nonfiction. I read so much nonfiction in my undergrad and I'm just like anticipating reading a ton more nonfiction in my graduate studies and I'm just not looking forward to it. I just want to like get it done, get it over with. But anyways, for genres, my top 4 genres are LGBTQIA+, which I read a total of 12 books that fit that genre. For the next one, it is contemporary, and I read a total of 7 books. The next 2 genres are tied, so literary and fantasy are tied for 6 books. And yeah, you can just see the rest of the genres that I read. For tags, I always like to track my tags because if you are unfamiliar with my reading tracking system that I use the Storygraph, and on the Storygraph you can tag every single book that you read, and I tag every single book that I own as an owned book, so I know how many books I read each month that I own physically. So for this one, I read 15 books that were tagged as owned, so I read 15 of my owned books. Then I have library books, that equals to 3 library books. And then I have ARC, which I read 2 ARCs. And then this other one, 2021 Reads. I used to tag all of my books as like I read this in 2020, I read this in 2021. I don't do that anymore because it just gets like really complicated. As for format, 10% of the books that I read were read digitally, so that is like an ebook. That equals, the 10% equals to 2 books that I read. Another 10% were audio, like solely via audio. So that 10% equals 2 books. And then for print, 80% of the books I read were primarily in print. That equals to 16 books. And then my star ratings, I had a pretty good reading month considering I did DNF a book and I did give a book like 2 stars. I did have a ton of 5 stars. So as you can see, I had 9 5 stars, I had 1 4.5, 1 4.25, 4 4 stars, 1 3.75, 1 3.25, 2 3 stars, and then 1 2.25 stars. And yeah, those cover all of my reading statistics. Now let's get on to the actual books that I read. So the first book that I read was a sequel. I guess it's like the 4th or the 5th book in a series. This is called The Brides of High Hill by Nevo. This is the Singing Hills cycle series, whatever you want to call it. We are following Cleric Chi as they kind of travel across the lands and collect stories. That's their job basically. And I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was the most fun out of all the books that I read in this series so far. It had a very interesting premise and there was a twist that I was not anticipating at all. So yeah, I gave this one 5 stars. It is definitely my favorite in the Singing Hills cycle that I've read so far. It is also the newest book out of the series, so yeah. The next book that I read was Katherine House by Elizabeth Thomas. This one was a little disappointing for me. I truthfully was anticipating Katherine House to be a 5-star for me. Like, I thought it was going to knock it out of the park. I thought it was going to be one of my favorite books ever. Unfortunately, it was not. I just realized I have the physical book because I own the book. So yeah, this book, if you don't know what it's about, it is about an institution called Katherine House. An institution as in like a school. A school institution, not like a mental institution. But anyways, this house is notorious for like its secrets. And anybody who enters Katherine House and graduates ends up being like really famous in whatever field that they choose. Or like very, what's the word? Prolific in the field that they choose. So we're following our main character. What the heck is her name? Our main character, Inez, is running from her past. And essentially, she joins Katherine House to try and find a way out of, like, the troubles that she is running from her past. And I don't know. I just thought that the storytelling was fine. The plot was kind of plotless, which, like, I will admit, I love a plotless book that is all just vibes, but I just didn't understand where this book was going, and that could just be like a me thing. Like, I didn't understand like what the point of the book was. And then the ending is like one of those ambiguous endings, and it didn't bother me or anything. I was just like, okay, it's over. Like, I don't know. I just didn't have any strong feelings towards it one way or another. So that's why I gave it a 3-star. Ultimately, though, like I said, it was pretty disappointing for me because, like I said, I thought it was going to be a 5-star. I thought I was going to be obsessed with Katherine House. The next book that I read is Veronica Ruiz Breaks the Bank. This is part of the Finlay Donovan series. This is a little novella that it takes place between the 3rd and the 4th book, so it's like 3.5. And it follows Veronica Ruiz, or Vero, as we know her from the series. And we kind of get to know her backstory, essentially. And that's all I'm going to say because it's such a short book. It's a little novella, honestly. And the audiobook itself is 2.5 hours long, so it's not that long of a novella. This book was fine. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed getting to know Vero's backstory, but ultimately it wasn't anything that really wowed me, so I just gave it a 3-star. Next we have On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. This book was so amazing. I was kindly given the UK edition or the European edition of the book. My boyfriend went to Germany like 2 years ago at this point and brought me back a book, and I was just very excited. So I finally got around to reading this. This book is quite heavy-hitting. This book follows our main character as he's writing a letter to his mom, and the characters are of Vietnamese descent, and so the main character that we're following, who is writing this letter to address to his mom, is talking about what it's like to live as a Vietnamese immigrant, because he did immigrate, but he was very young when he immigrated to the United States. It's just about the nuances of being an immigrant and being the child of immigrants as well. And the whole premise of this book is that we're going over his life story, and his mom can't read English and he's writing this in English. So it's like, it's very heavy hitting. It is very emotional. I related to some of the stuff in here as my mom is an immigrant, and some of the things that the main character was talking about were, I guess, very relatable to me. I'm not an immigrant. I was born in the United States, but we had very similar experiences in certain things. So I thought that this was very heavy hitting. I don't know if enjoyed is the right word, but I thought that the writing was beautiful and that, like I said, very heart-wrenching. The main character is also gay, so he talks about growing up in this culture, this Vietnamese culture, and what it's like to grow up knowing that he's gay, and just the nuances of that as well. It was very heart-wrenching, honestly, thought-provoking. I loved it, and the prose is beautiful. Like I said, this book is written as a letter, but the author is a poet as well, so they have just beautiful writing. And yeah, I just love this so much, and I'm so happy that I finally got to read this. I gave this a 4 stars ultimately. I don't know if I mentioned that, but yeah, this was one of my favorite books of the month. Next, I read a YA book, which is shocking because I don't remember the last time I read a YA book. This is She Gets the Girl by Rachel Lippincott and Allison Derrick. So we are following our 2 main characters, Alex Blackwood and Molly Parker. They meet as freshmen in college, like very early on in the school year, like honestly, like first night as freshmen in college, they meet at a party. And they have these first impressions of each other that are very like judgmental, in terms of like they base their opinions on that person based on that first impression, which I know first impression can really influence how you see a person, but they really hold on to that first impression in like a negative way. And so the 2 of them, Alex Blackwood and Molly Parker, they both form a friendship because Molly, they're both gay by the way. Molly, they're both, I don't know if they're both lesbians, but they're both queer. Anyways, Molly has a crush on this girl who she went to high school with, who is also going to the same university that they're at. So Alex decides to help her kind of work up the courage to ask out this girl, because Molly has never gone on a date, never dated anyone. Like, she's very much so new to the dating scene, and Alex helps her, and eventually Alex and Molly fall in love, and it's just a cute little romance. I really enjoyed it. I thought some of the themes in this were very interesting for like a YA book, especially because this follows teens that are in college. So some of the themes I thought were interesting to bring up, especially because this feels more like a new adult book than a YA book, but I don't know. I ended up giving this a 4-star. I really enjoyed this book, and it was just a fun little romance. I loved it. Next, I read You Exist Too Much by Zaina Arafat. This book is following a Palestinian American girl. What is her name? We are following a Palestinian American girl, and the opening scene is like very interesting. It really stuck out to me. The opening scene is of our main character, who is 12, walking through Bethlehem, and she's walking with her family, and she's wearing like shorts and exposing her legs, which is like in, I guess, their culture. I don't know if it's like a Muslim thing or like just a Palestinian cultural thing, but like showing her legs is looked down upon, and so people were like looking at her like, why are you showing your legs? So she ended up switching her pants with her uncle's pants, and you must be thinking like, what the heck, a 12-year-old and an uncle, like they are not the same size. You would be correct. The uncle squeezed into her shorts and they walked around like that until they could find the uncle a new pair of pants or something like that. I can't remember what happened afterwards, but our main character, that is like the opening scene of like her essentially being told that like, you are existing too loud, you are being too loud, you exist too much. And so it flashes between the United States and the Middle East. Our main character is a DJ and is having trouble with keeping relationships in terms of like, she feels that whenever she's in a relationship, she's always looking for like the next best thing, and she can't turn down opportunities to get to know someone because she thinks that they might be the one, even if she's in a relationship. Like, I don't know how to describe it, but it's very interesting. It's a very interesting book. I recommend going into this kind of blind. Like, I didn't know much about this. I just knew that it was about a Palestinian American woman and that it was mostly vibes, and it's kind of like a character study as well. So that's all you really need to know. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it a 4.25. It was a blast, but like not in a, it was such a fun, silly, goofy time. More like it was very thought-provoking, and I enjoyed that. Next, I read What Fire Brings by Rachel Housel Hall. This was an ARC that I was kindly sent by NetGalley and the publishers. I was kindly sent this book by NetGalley and the publisher Thomas and Mercer, so thank you to the publisher and for NetGalley for giving me this ARC. Unfortunately, this book kind of dragged for me. This is a mystery thriller about a woman who, like, she is a black woman and she enters this white space in the very beginning of the book. The main character is a private investigator in training, and she enters into this white space that is basically like, she's pretending to be a writer, and she enters this writing competition for this like famous writer, and she ends up getting picked for this competition, and she goes to this event in the very beginning of the book where she meets like all the people involved in the competition, and she goes to this like author event, and she's like literally the only black person there, and she automatically feels that feeling of being like kind of on edge, heightened awareness. And never mind, she's there as a private investigator trying to investigate the disappearance of this woman, and essentially she gets wrapped up into the world of this author. I forgot to mention, but they are also in Topanga Canyon, which I'm not sure if it is a real place or not. I never looked it up, but it is in the wilderness. Like, they are very remote, very removed from like a city, a large city. So she ends up staying at the author's estate, on this remote estate, and things go down, okay? And there's like definitely several twists in this book that I did not see coming. So it was interesting in that regard, but ultimately it dragged getting to that point. Like, the first 50% of the book, I was like hardcore thinking of DNFing, and then the last 50% of the book, I was like hooked, intrigued. I needed to know more. There were things happening, and I understand that all of the first 50% needed to happen in order to get the backstory for the second 50%, the second half. But it just dragged a little too much for me, and so I ultimately gave this a 3.25. I know on NetGalley you can't give like half stars or anything, but like, so I gave it a 3 on NetGalley. But on the Storygraph you can give half and quarter stars, so this is technically a 3.25. I really enjoyed the second half, like I mentioned, but it was just like a slog getting to like that second half. So take my opinion with a grain of salt. If that sounds interesting to you, I do recommend that you read it. I just think that for the pacing that I like for thrillers, I didn't enjoy the first half. And that's all I'm going to say. The next book I read is a highly anticipated book that I finally got the chance to read. This is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. This was a 5-star prediction, and thankfully it lived up to my prediction. I gave this 5 stars. I loved it. If you don't know what this is about, we are following Linus Baker, who is a caseworker for the department in charge of magical youth. And he's kind of middle-aged, living alone with his cat. He follows the rules. He doesn't like step a toe out of line, you know what I mean? And he gets sent on this special case to the house in the Cerulean Sea, which is this house on the cover. His time there is very transformative for him. There's also a little bit of a romance. So I really loved this book. I thought the whole found family aspect of it was amazing. The ideas surrounding like not conforming to the status quo or whatever, and not being afraid to be authentically yourself is a very important theme in my opinion. It's really the found family that really did it for me. I loved this book. It is a bit of a chunker compared to the size books that I normally read, but I flew through it. I love this so much. So yeah, this is like one of my new faves. Next, I read An Excellent Host by Chelsea G. Summers. This I have featured in an author taste test, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. This is, as you can see, a very short story that Chelsea G. Summers ended up, publishing this year in April, I believe, for Indie Bookstore Day. And my copy is signed. I don't know if you can see the signature, but anyways, I'm so excited about that. This book, I'm not going to tell you anything about it. I'm just going to say I loved it. Gave it 5 stars. And if you want to see my thoughts, check out the author taste test. I'll have it linked up here or up here. Wherever it may be, I will have it linked so you guys can hear my thoughts on this. The next book that I read was Paradise Rot by Jenny Haval. And this book is a book that I've heard like little whisperings about on the internet. And so I thought, might as well just pick it up. I got the audiobook from my library, so I picked it up. It was definitely weird, which I thought would be right up my alley. Unfortunately, it was not. It was very weird, but in a meandering sort of way, to where I didn't understand like why the book was written, if I'm being quite honest. That sounds very harsh, and yeah, if that doesn't bode well for this book, because I gave it a 2.25 stars. It just generally wasn't my fave. I thought that I would be very interested in it because it's like a queer book, a queer like horror book, but it just wasn't my vibe. That's okay. Maybe it'll be your cup of tea, but it just wasn't mine. So the next book that I read, as I normally go in like the order that I read these books, So technically the next book that I read is The Tea Dragon Society, but I'm going to talk about the series as a whole because I read the whole series this month. So after The Tea Dragon Society, I read Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. This book was very interesting. We follow Alice, who is a novelist. She meets Felix. And then we're also following Alice's friend who is in Dublin, Eileen, who is flirting with Simon. So we're following these two couples, but we're mainly following Alice and Eileen's friendship as well. Part of the story is written in letters between Alice and Eileen. So I really enjoyed this story. It wasn't like my favorite Sally Rooney. I was really compelled by Normal People, and this has a little different of a vibe than Normal People. Honestly, they're a lot more similar than I initially thought, because we're following like flawed people trying to figure out life and also figure out their romantic relationships and stuff like that. And I enjoyed this. It was ultimately a little frustrating watching these characters like slowly work through their trauma, which I understand is like the point of it, because not everybody gets over their trauma like within a day, you know what I mean? But I just was expecting more. I was expecting it to be more emotionally provoking for me. I ultimately gave it a 3.75, which is not a bad rating at all. I do recommend that you read this if you like Normal People. I don't know. There's something a little lacking from this, but I am excited to pick up Intermezzo as well as Conversations with Friends, because I have yet to pick up Conversations with Friends, and I'm very much looking forward to that. And then Intermezzo is Sally Rooney's newest book that is coming out, I believe in September. So yeah, the next book that I read after Beautiful World, Where Are You is technically the next book in the Tea Dragon Society, which is called the Tea Dragon Festival, but like I said, we'll talk about that later. So the actual next book that we are going to be talking about is this graphic novel called Wash Day Diaries. This is by Jamila Rouser. And so I've had this graphic novel as an ebook on my iPad for the longest time, and I finally got around to reading it, and I thought it was wonderful. It follows a group of 4 girls. They're all either like black or of like Afro-Latino descent, something like that. But all of them have in common that they have very curly hair. Some of them have kinky curly hair, some of them have like less curly hair, but like still they all have very curly hair. And so it follows the group. We follow each individual person in the group as they kind of go through their life, but it centers on their wash day or their like hair care day. And it was very interesting. I really loved all the themes of like taking care of your mental health, taking care of familial relationships, the nuances of like having an elderly grandparent who might not remember you because they are having memory problems, stuff like that, as well as just like being in a girl group and having each other's back no matter what. I just thought it was beautiful. So I gave this 4 stars. I really loved it. And yeah, it wasn't perfect or anything, but I really highly recommend that you pick this one up. It's also beautiful, like the colors and the like actual drawing style or illustration style. It was beautiful overall. I really enjoyed this one. The next book that I read is A Certain Hunger by Chelsea G. Summers. And like I said, I did an author taste test for Chelsea G. Summers, so look at that video, see my thoughts on these books. And I gave this a 5 stars, but I go more in depth with my thoughts in that vlog. So yeah. Next, I'm going to include this book that is not technically in my wrap up because I DNF'd Devil House by John Darnielle. This book, I don't even know why I picked it up. I think I saw like a booktuber talking about it one day and I thought the cover was really cool, so I picked it up. I'm going to read the inside cover to you. It says, from John Darnielle. Did I say Josh? I meant John. From John Darnielle, the New York Times bestselling author and the singer-songwriter of The Mountain Goats, comes an epic, gripping novel about murder, truth, and the dangers of storytelling. So I'm actually not going to read the whole blurb to you. I'm just going to tell you that I thought this book was about like a haunting maybe, or like a murder, and you're trying to figure out like horror-esque vibes, like who done it. But this is more of like a true crime story, as the main character is, I believe, a police officer, or like a retired police officer or something like that. And I didn't want to read about that. This also, there was a blurb that said that the author basically blurs the lines between what's real and what's fiction, and I was just like, I'm not in the mood for that. So if you couldn't tell, I'm not a true crime girly. Not that I have anything against true crime girlies, but I don't know, I just wasn't in the mood for this. I might pick it up later because I just realized that Carmen Maria Machado blurbed this. She said the prose lives like the protagonist's imagination, a breathing, growing thing. In Darnielle's novel, as in his songs, the monstrously true and unbelievably beautiful press up against one another. Together they begin to dance. And if you don't know, Carmen Maria Machado is like an amazing storyteller in my opinion. I love her so much. So yeah, I might pick this one up again. We'll see. Maybe. But don't hold your breath on that. Okay, now we are going to talk about the Tea Dragon Society. I have the complete collection here. I'm not going to take any of the books out, but this is a graphic novel series. This is a children's graphic novel series following tea dragons, and it is in this fantastical world where there are little tiny like tea dragons that are the size of like cats, and they grow tea leaves on their head and their backs, and if you take care of them and love them and treat them well, they will bear like the leaves for you. And each book was just beautiful. I love Kay O'Neill and their writing and their beautiful illustrations. The illustrations are just impeccable. I love them so much. And so I gave all of the books in the collection 5 stars. Like, so good. They touch upon topics of like grief and longing and growing into a whole new person, grieving the person that you once were, stuff like that, grieving a past life, not in the sense of like reincarnation, but more in the sense of like your circumstances change, and so you had to change your lifestyle, and so grieving like the past lifestyle that you used to live, stuff like that. It was beautiful. I loved it. There's cute friendships in there, and I just loved it with my whole heart. It was so wholesome. We are almost done, guys. I think I have like 4 more books. I do. I have 4 more books. So now we're getting on to the books that I read while I was on vacation. If you didn't know, I was on vacation the past week in Hawaii, and so on the plane ride there, my boyfriend actually got this for me for the trip. This is In the Likely Event by Rebecca Yarros. Yes, this is the same Rebecca Yarros who wrote Fourth Wing. Am I going to read Fourth Wing? Have I ever read Fourth Wing? No and no. This book follows Izzy and, what the heck is his name? Nate. Izzy and Nate meet on a plane ride, and then it's funny because I don't think my boyfriend read the whole synopsis. He read like the first part of the synopsis where it's like talking about how they met and they met on a plane, and then he stopped there. He was like, that's good, we're gonna get it. The second part of the synopsis mentions, oh yeah, they meet on a plane, but then the plane ultimately crashes and they end up spending the next 10 years coming in and out of each other's lives and being in a friendship or like a will they won't they type of relationship. It was ultimately like a fun time. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very interesting. The current timeline in the book follows them in Afghanistan, in like a war-torn country. So I thought that was an interesting backdrop to have. I've never read a book set in Afghanistan before, so I thought that was interesting. But I just thought it was funny that my boyfriend got this book for me to read on the plane, and the first scene is the plane crashing. So that did not bode well for our plane ride, but obviously I made it back safe. Like, I am here, I am in good health. But I just thought that was funny. I gave this 4 stars ultimately. I read it in one sitting on the plane ride. Yeah, it was a good time. Next I read Fat Chance Charlie Vega by Crystal Maldonado. This book is another YA book, which is surprising because I don't really read that many YA books. So in this book we're following Charlie Vega, and she is like a fat queen. Like, she is in high school. She is kind of struggling with her weight and the way that she feels that she's being perceived, if that makes sense. She has a best friend who is, like, in the beginning of the book in a relationship, and Charlie Vega has yet to be in a relationship, so she has all these insecurities and she's like working through them. I thought ultimately it was a beautiful story, as Charlie Vega has to work through her struggles, her insecurities, in order to finally be happy. I gave this a 4.5 stars. I also just love the cover. I think it's a beautiful cover. And yeah, a great book. The next book that I read was The Next Best Fling by Gabriela Gomez. Gomez? I don't know how you pronounce her name. It's like Gomez but with an A. This was another arc that I was kindly sent by NetGalley and the publisher Forever Publishing. I loved this book. I'm gonna be honest. This was like one of my favorite books of the month. This book follows, what are the main characters' names? This book follows Marcella and Theo. Marcella and Theo are acquaintances, let's say. Marcella is Theo's brother's best friend, and Theo is obviously Marcella's best friend's brother. That's how they know each other, and they come together when the brother of Theo, I forget his name, he's unimportant, decides to, like, propose to his girlfriend, and it turns out Theo is in love with his brother's girlfriend, and Marcella is in love with her best friend, who is Theo's brother. I hope that makes sense. I'm forgetting the other characters' names because they're not really as important as Marcella and Theo. But anyways, I didn't know what to expect going into this, but Marcella and Theo ultimately start a fake dating relationship, which I loved. And Marcella is also a librarian. Theo is a former NFL player. So it was just a lovely time. I loved everything that the book did. I thought that it was such a beautiful story, as Marcella and Theo have basically met each other at like rock bottom, and then they slowly support each other into becoming better versions of themselves alongside like becoming best friends. So I thought it was just overall a great time. I gave it 5 stars. I really highly recommend that you pick this book up. I just thought it was beautiful. I read it in like so fast on the plane in like one sitting. The last book that I have to share with you is a book that I just finished yesterday. This is Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree. This is the prequel to Legends and Lattes by the same author, Travis Baldree. And this follows Viv as she essentially was on a mission with Rackham and his ravens. And she gets injured, and she has to kind of spend a month in this town called Merk healing, and then she eventually starts like befriending people in the town. And I just thought it was a wonderful time. I just thought it was glorious. Viv is one of my favorite characters. I love her so much, and she ends up helping, on the cover you can kind of tell that they're in a bookshop. So she ends up helping these characters revive the bookshop, and it was just a wonderful time. I gave it 5 stars. I loved this honestly a little more than Legends and Lattes. There's also a mystery going on throughout this book that's related to like the mission that Rackham and his ravens were on, because Viv was a part of Rackham's crew. And yeah, I just thought it was a blast. Alright y'all, those were all the books. I read 20 books this month, which I think is pretty crazy. I read a decent amount of full-length novels, and then as you saw, I read a couple graphic novels. And yeah, I just had an overall great month. So thank you guys so much for watching. I always have my social medias linked in the description down below. I have Instagram, Threads, TikTok, The Storygraph, and Goodreads, so follow me or friend me on any of those. If you made it this far into the video, comment the rat emoji because this is like a ratkin from the book. So comment a rat emoji. Thank you guys so much for watching. I have a ton of videos that I have planned for the future, so please like this video and subscribe to my channel down below. I would love to have you here, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.